found Why We Are Christians. My name is Kent Philpott, and I'm here with my wife Katie, and we have a special edition. This is special edition stuff. We're going over my book called Christian Basics. Now, you may wonder why we are doing this on Why We Are Christians program. It's because we don't have anybody to interview. We're going to be doing the Old Testament. This is lesson number 4. And when I did the book, the edition Christian Basics 2015, I used the word Old Testament. The new edition is going to just say Hebrew Bible. And the New Testament will be referred to as the Greek Bible. We feel it's more respectful for the people who are connected with the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. All right.
Right, because who wants to be told they have the old thing?
Well, you got the old.
And there's a newer thing.
Okay. So we're going to be looking at lesson 4, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. All right, Katie, get us going.
And I will read the beginning, which is, the Old Testament may also be referred to as the Torah, the Tenach, the Hebrew Bible, or the Hebrew Scriptures. The language of the Old Testament is Hebrew, except for several passages which are Aramaic. Aramaic uses the same Semitic alphabet, but is distinct from Hebrew.
Very interesting that you find both Aramaic and Hebrew in the Hebrew Bible. Like you said, it's the same alphabet. The words look the same. You were pointing out the difference between bar mitzvah
and ben mitzvah. Bar
is Aramaic for son. Right. Ben is Hebrew for son, but it's bar mitzvah.
Bar mitzvah.
Now there are 39 books in the Christian traditional layout of the Hebrew Bible.
And we could see that in our favorite version, which is the ESV, the English Standard Version. And I've got tabs on all of those books and various things. So you're going to find all of it in English in here as he's reading about.
So that, by the way, the ESV is just one of dozens and dozens of translations of the Bible, and I don't know which one is the best.
Yeah.
They're all probably very good at this point. So there are 39 books in the Christian traditional layout of the Hebrew Bible, but the count is different, oddly, in the Bible that is conformity to Judaism, and primarily because, for example, we have 1st and 2nd Samuel, we have 1st and 2nd Kings, we have 1st and 2nd Chronicles, but in the Hebrew Bible, it's just Samuel, Kings, Chronicles. One instead of 2, so the count is different.
So I would like to hold this one up. This one, wherever you are, is actually the Masoretic text. So it is completely Hebrew. It opens this direction because Hebrew goes from right to left, not from left to right. And indeed, those books that you just said, there's only 1 Samuel, 1 King, and 1 Chronicle, and they are in different order. Now, what's interesting is that here is another Hebrew, but including English, and it's made by the Jewish Publication Society, but it uses these orders and these numbers of books. Very interesting.
My Bible that I'm using here starts with Genesis. In the Hebrew Bible, goes to Malachi, and the Jewish will go from Genesis to Chronicles.
That's right. And it always starts with Genesis 1. Let me read just the first sentence.
Okay.
Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz.
Okay.
In the beginning.
In the beginning.
God created the heavens and the earth.
All right. This lesson now that we're working here is intended to acquaint the reader with only the general makeup of the Hebrew Bible. That's what we're doing with this program. Just the general makeup. Learning it in depth requires a lifetime at minimum, but understanding its basics is utterly necessary in order to have a proper understanding of the Greek Bible or the New Testament. By the way, the word testament means covenant, agreement, contract. In other words, it's God's contract with his creation. So we have two contracts, really only one. But the way the Bible is divided, it looks like there's two. There's really, we'll maybe discuss that. There's really only one contract. All right. So we're going to go on, Katie. If you get started on the major sections.
So the major sections. First, let me say that one of the words that I gave for what we call the Hebrew Scriptures is Tenach. It's an acronym. The Ta is for Torah. The N in the beginning, in the middle, is for Nevi'im, the prophets, and the K at the end is for Ketuvim, or the poetry, the writings, that kind of thing. So we're going to talk major sections. The first of those is the Torah. It's also called the Pentateuch, which is Greek for five books of Moses, and they are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and these are the first 5 books of the Old Testament.
Our book says the dates for the writing of the Pentateuch are uncertain,
right,
but are between the 15th and the 13th centuries BCE, before the Common Era, which means between around 1400 to maybe 1600, 1500s, 1400s, in that area, about 1450 BCE to about 1250 BCE. Now, some scholars, though, as we well know, date these books much later, some even earlier, but the precise date of the authorship of the original copies is elusive and will always be debatable.
Let me say that in a big scholarly effort like this ESV Study Bible, they even have a chart in the beginning of introducing the Old Testament to talk about, here are the pros and cons for the earlier dates, here are the pros and cons for the later dates. You decide. So the author of the Pentateuch, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, is, guess who? Moses. That is the traditionally stated author. But obviously the last section of Deuteronomy couldn't have been written by Moses because it describes his death. It's not that big a part. It's easy to see how someone has added it on to kind of round out the story. Some scholars suggest that other scribes working over many centuries were involved in the final preparation of the books. Both liberal and conservative scholars agree on this, but no view prevents the God-breathing that transforms the books into sacred scripture.
Yes, and it was a period of time that went on before the books began to be viewed as inspired scripture. We'll find out later that the writings, when we get to the writings, were not determined to be inspired scripture by the rabbis, by the leaders of Judaism, until the 2nd century, about
in the Common Era.
135 Common Era, 2nd century. So there's a lot that we don't know about this. By the way, the Hebrew Bible, the Masoretic text, that was a group of people, the Masoretes, who collected the Hebrew scripture. This is in the 800s, 900s, 1000s.
Yeah, and that's what
was a community. They came up with the text. Oddly enough, they conform very well to those manuscripts that were found in the Qumran community,
the Dead
better
Sea
known
Scrolls.
as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so there was only 2 books not found. I think it was Esther and Ruth. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they had a hard time accepting those as canonical.
Because they were about women.
About women, yes. And the women, well. And they also, the Esther one was late.
That's true. Persian period. But at any rate, so the next section, we've looked at the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses. By the way, some people think that Deuteronomy was written much later, was kind of a compilation of the first four. We don't know about these things, but they are irrelevant in terms of God's communicating things to us. Okay, Katie, historical books, please.
Okay, the historical books are Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. So those are all giving actual historical, this is what happened, these are the people, not just laws and commandments or poetic or whatever.
Right. The dates for these books generally go from the 14th century to the 4th century BCE. However, each book's date must be considered separately. It's just not lump sum. They appeared over centuries of time, and the books were collected. The books were be collected by those people who perhaps they were the priests. Later on, in the rabbinical tradition, when that developed during the intertestamental period, the last 4 centuries BCE, and they were collected, and they had to be authenticated, and they had their way of going about it.
Right.
So a lot of times the authors are rarely known, and many guesses have been made, but the books themselves, no author is stated. You don't have Joshua, I wrote this, or Ruth, I wrote this, or Samuel, I wrote this.
No, they didn't. That wasn't paramount for them then. By what we call the New Testament time, most of them say something about who's writing them, but not all of them either.
But not all of them. Okay, I'm going to do the poetic and wisdom books. Poetic wisdom books: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and Daniel.
What? You mean he's not in the historical books?
Or prophetic books, really.
Or prophetic?
Not in the prophetic books. In my book, I made a mistake. I have to admit, I included Daniel amongst the prophetic books when really,
yes.
And when we do a new edition, we'll be correcting that. But anyway.
Well, since, it is very clear when he is writing about. It could be a prophetic book. It could even be a historical book. But
it was written during the Babylonian Persian era.
Right. And so
parts of Daniel are in Aramaic.
Okay, so maybe we will get to the point where we talk about what do you mean by Babylonian and Persian era.
No chance. No chance today.
No chance today. Someday, maybe. Okay.
So the dates of these books generally fit into the 10th to the 8th centuries BCE, that is between 900 and 700 BCE. The books are mostly authored by kings. David, Solomon, and others unnamed, but all come out of the community of Israel. Okay, Katie.
Okay, so then we go to the next of the groupings, and that is the prophetic books. So those are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. I'm sure we could make some kind of song out of that, but the big ones are the long ones are especially Isaiah, Jeremiah, and
Ezekiel.
And Ezekiel. There's 12 that are considered minor only because they're shorter, not because they're less important or God is not really as interested in what they have to say.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
And the dates of the authorship vary from the 8th to the 4th century, so they're getting newer.
Yes, that's right. And then, of course, we come to what's called the intertestamental period. That is the period between the writings of the first of the New Testament books, or the Greek Bible's books, where probably the first one was written by James, the first pastor of the Church of Jerusalem and the half-brother of Jesus, which would have been probably in the late 40s, but that's going to be, of course, something we'll talk about later. So you got this period. Let's just round it off to 50 CE, 50 Common Era or AD. And so the last of the books we find in our Hebrew Bible will have been written someplace between, let's say, 525 and 475 BCE. So you've got this long space of time that's called the intertestamental period, in which no books.
Well, no canonical books.
No canonical books.
No canonical.
No apocryphal.
So what so then you've got the Holy Bible that the Roman Catholic Church uses. They have the Apocrypha in it, and those are books that somehow got in there. There's some historical reasons for it that we don't have to get involved in, but there are books in there that some people consider Holy Scripture.
Now, the apocryphal books, meaning apocalypse means revealing. And these books, for example, you think of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, were largely a romanticized history of the Jewish revolt against the Syrians.
The Greeks.
The Greeks. And so there was a number of books that sprang up during that era. And then there's another
the Maccabees had a short-lived kind of kingdom, and that was the last time the Jews actually ruled over themselves. It was in like 180s BC, something like that, BCE.
Right. Now, there's another classification of books that sprang up in that era. It's called the pseudepigraphal. It means the false writings were not looked upon as scripture.
By anyone,
but they were usually glorified accounts of all kinds of different things. But the reason, what happened was, when Jerome translated the Bible into Latin, he included the apocryphal books. And so in many groups, like the Roman Catholic Church, you'll find the apocryphal books there. The reason we don't find them in this Bible, for instance, and that one, is because the Jewish rabbinical tradition did not consider them to be inspired. And so, but because Jerome put them into the Latin Vulgate, they were considered this is acceptable scripture. But then you won't find them in the Protestant Bible because the primary rulers of Judaism did not accept them as authoritative scripture, relied upon them for certain history, but not inspired scripture.
Right.
Major themes. Yep. Okay, the major themes. Katie and I, when we were on about a 6-month delayed honeymoon, we traveled across the country, and we read a book by a great Baptist theologian by the name of John Sailhammer. What was the name of the book? I can't remember.
The Pentateuch.
It was just called the Pentateuch. And what he did was he outlined the major themes of the Bible. So we traveled across the country in my old Dodge van all the way to North Carolina and back. We talked about John Sailhammer, and what he focused on was the major themes.
Yeah.
And that has always captivated me.
And he and on the he called them the red threads that tie together things.
So you find them in Genesis. Almost all the major themes and all the threads begin in Genesis, and they continue through the Tenach. But we'll see next week that they also go right to the book of Revelation.
And we have a short phrase for it: God's plan of salvation.
Right. So the themes are extremely interesting. And we're going to present 7 of them right now, 7 of the major themes. So these the themes of what God has planned for his people in the future. Okay, Katie, you get the first one?
God is creator. And that means, we're saying by what means, we don't know, but he is directly in control and sovereign.
This is what you see of God, the maker of heaven and earth.
Mm-hmm.
The Apostles' Creed says the creator of heaven and earth.
Mm-hmm.
All Christians hold to that. We will never understand it, but it is a consistent theme all the way through creation. Before there was creation, there was nothing that we know of as time. There was not a universe. We don't know what it was. We have no idea what infinity actually looks like. We don't have any idea. But it's a theme. It's an unavoidable theme.
And let me just say that it also means he is the only one who creates, we call ex nihilo, out of nothing.
Out of nothing.
And it's very interesting that in the first 2 chapters of Genesis, the word is in Hebrew means create. He created this, he created that, he created that. And all of a sudden, at some point, it switches to made, because everything had already been created, all the elements from which everything else could be made. In the rest of the Torah, never is that word used for human beings. Human beings can make things, they can construct things, they can bring pieces together, so to speak, but they never create. That word for create, bara, is only used for God.
Right. So we find many metaphors in the Scripture to try to break things down for us so we can grasp it to some degree. All right, the second one, God is personal. He communicates with his creation that he made in his own image. He set boundaries and acted in judgment when these were violated. The idea, God is personal. The story is God created Adam and Eve. At a time we don't know how long it took. I generally agree with whatever the latest scientific theory is, whether it's 13.8 or 13.5, or I'm not a young earth creationist. That was never the intention. But he's personal. He made people in his image, meaning he could talk with them. He could have fellowship.
Yes.
Fellowship with them, because there they were, right in the presence of God. And in Psalm, we better get moving, Katie.
Okay.
Number 3.
God is a lawgiver who establishes covenants or agreements with those whom he calls to himself.
No, he doesn't say, okay, hey, you guys, just go make it up for yourself. Whatever you do is just fine. Go to it.
Right. Instead, he says, I am your God, and you are my people, and I expect thus and such from you, and there are consequences if you don't, and so there's both good consequences for doing it and bad consequences for not doing it.
Right. I want to go back to the personal thing, the fellowship. The major theme in the Bible, the major thing that runs all the way through, we're created in the image of God, meaning the capacity to communicate with, to be in fellowship with. After the first rejection of the first law, don't eat of the fruit of that tree, the fellowship dissolved.
It broke.
They were sent east of Eden. And the whole rest of the Bible is how we came back into fellowship with God. And heaven is paradise restored, in full fellowship, present with God. Okay. The lawgiver for our own good, because we have a tendency to do weird things. Okay, number 4, Katie.
Now, God is holy. It's like you have to say holy. Utterly separated from sin, demanding holiness from those whom he created. Uh-oh.
God is holy. That's why, that's the whole story of Jesus on the cross, removing our sin. because our sin stands between us and God. Therefore, we make our own gods and goddesses and our own everything because we are not in fellowship with God. There had to be a way of removing that sin, and that's what the cross is all about. Okay, so God is holy. Number 5, God is steadfast in his love for his people and provides a means for their redemption. His commandments and his sacrificial system are the center of his redemptive plan. Okay.
And the sacrificial system is, of course, what you just referred to. Jesus' death on the cross is the final necessary sacrifice.
And in the book of Genesis, you find beginning, first of all, with Cain and Abel.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go to Genesis 3:15,
Mm-hmm.
Where the seed of the woman,
Mm-hmm.
the seed of the woman triumphs. Although Satan would bruise the heel, the seed of the woman would deliver a death blow to Satan. We find this theme all the way through Scripture, all the way. We find it in the sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham, the Akedah. We find the story over and over. We find it in the prophets, Isaiah chapter 53.
And the whole sacrificial system in the temple, but it ended in 70 AD, and then what do?
Okay, we got 2 more.
2 more. God sends prophets to warn and guide his people.
Prophets are preachers. There's 2 kinds of prophets, in my view. There's those who announce the coming of Messiah, and those prophets who say, Messiah is here, trust and believe in him.
Okay.
Those are the prophets are preachers or proclaimers.
Proclaimers.
And so
and they also warners, warn and guide. Yeah.
Right. So, okay, number 7.
2 Messiahs are evident in the Old Testament. Messiah, son of Joseph, is the suffering servant of Israel, and Messiah, son of David, is the mighty warrior king.
It's always been a conundrum, the 2 Messiahs that are clearly pictured in the Hebrew Bible. The people at the time, the religious authorities, when Jesus was there, they were looking for deliverance from Rome. They wanted Messiah, son of David. Instead, they got Messiah, son of Joseph, the suffering servant of Israel, who would take the sin of the people upon himself.
Yes.
And then looking forward to the end of the age, when indeed Messiah, son of David, will come as the mighty, conquering king. Wow, those are the great themes, Those are the great themes. And we're going to be looking in the next program at the Greek Bible, otherwise known as the New Testament. So long.